Welcome. I have the extreme pleasure of being able to introduce to you a legend in United States and the world civil rights history. We have Reverend Dr. James Lawson. And I just want to give you a little bit of background about him before we hear from him. He's a third generation Methodist minister who was born in Uniontown, Pennsylvania. And he earned his local pastor's license in 1949. Soon after being graduated from high school, he was drafted into the US military, refused to enlist, and as a conscientious objector received a 3-year prison sentence, of which he served 13 months. Following his prison term, Reverend Lawson served as a missionary in India for 3 years, where he studied nonviolent resistance and embraced the practices of Mohandas K. Gandhi, whom he had first begun to study in 1947. In his long and storied history, Reverend Lawson orchestrated the lunch counter sit-in campaign in Nashville, Tennessee, the largest and most influential of the Southern student sit-in campaigns. He developed strategy for the Freedom Riders, and he taught the theory and practice of nonviolent direct action to students, activists, future civil rights leaders, and politicians, including U.S. Representative John R. Lewis. Reverend Lawson has been active in many campaigns and in the instruction of emergent leaders. He's often been referred to as the mind of the movement. The Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. called him the leading theorist and strategist of nonviolence in the world. He remains a staunch defender of human rights. I've had the good fortune of being with him here in Los Angeles, of knowing him early in my human rights, civil rights career, of learning from him, and of being inspired by him continually. So it is my honor to present to Reverend Lawson our special IAOHRA President's Award for his extraordinary contribution to protecting and fulfilling universal human rights here and around the world. Reverend Lawson.
Thank you so very much for that introduction. And I am very, very delighted and pleased to be with you at this national meeting, the International Association of Official Human Rights Associations and Officers. I don't need to tell you that one of the reasons I'm delighted to be here is because the area of human rights must become a fundamental, essential area of work for the whole human family and for every nation, because there are too many other things going in our world that are destructive of human life. And your agency is one of the agencies that must be the essential for a world where the human race is allowed to mature into the human race, and the issues that affect the human race become the agenda of all the power associations in the world today. It's one of the reasons I admire former President Jimmy Carter, because he had the tenacity as President of the United States to say that the USA foreign policy ought to have a major platform called human rights. I don't know if the association knows that that's the case back in the 72, 73, 74, 75, 76. But Jimmy Carter, the peanut farmer from Georgia, is the one who saw instantly that the USA State Department and foreign policies were more connected to war and economic disruption and advantage than it was to justice and freedom and equality for every human being. So he made human rights a major platform and caused Congress to indicate that a major platform of our foreign international policy had to be human rights. That's a part of your background. I don't want to lift up briefly, but I'm pleased to be here. I'm going to speak quite briefly around the theme that I like, which I think is an essential theme for human rights activists of all kinds and for every struggle of justice. And that theme is, where do we go from here? Chaos or community? And I borrow that title from the book of 1967 by Martin Luther King Jr., where Dr. King, in trying to summarize what our movement meant or means, titled his book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. If you have not read that book, I suggest you reach out for it. It is still in print, and read it. And listen. Then may I also say about it that the book represents not the meaning of what is called in conventional language the civil rights movement, but for a specific major campaign that became almost like the nuclear explosive engine for the civil rights movement. And that's the campaign that the late Congressman John Lewis entitled The Nonviolent Movement of America. As a teacher of nonviolence, next year again, January at UCLA and University of California, and University of CSUN, California State University, Northridge, I will be teaching nonviolent struggle, justice, and human rights. And then at the core of it is the teaching about the history of the nonviolent movement of America, which I date 1953 to 1973. In that 20-year period, we had extraordinary movements all over the country, but especially in the southeastern part of the country, so that the historian Vincent Harding called the movement out of the South the Black Freedom Movement, the Black Justice Movement. A historian from Yale called it the Black Church Movement, all of which intellectually, I think, is fairly accurate and solidly rooted in the reality and the consequences and so forth, and how that whole campaign came about. I'm pressing this hard because I think that what we did then, 1953, 1973, is current, because for the first time, the spiritual forces of wickedness which oppose human beings being treated with dignity and with justice and equality around our country, came to a head in the person of the former president of the United States. Around Brother Trump clusters all the historic forces in United States history that asserts both the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States are wrong, should not be followed. Hence, in contradiction to the notion that we have been a democracy since 1776 or 1789. We have not been a democracy. Only in this century are the forces of democratic thought on the front pages or the back pages of the newspaper. We instead have been a nation shaped, and I'm going to say this as quickly and briefly as I can, by 4 historical forces of spiritual wickedness: racism, sexism, violence, and what I call plantation capitalism. Now, I want you to be sure. Sexism, racism, violence, and plantation capitalism. These 4 forces, each of them, but all of them together, diminish the dignity of human life. And they deny the Declaration of Independence, which proclaims, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal, that all are endowed by the Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration of Independence, the preamble, ought to be your model as an international association of official human rights agencies. And you ought to teach it. You ought to make certain it is prominent in every office. Because it says, among other things, to the current situation, that no man or no woman is an island unto themselves. Their right and dignity, their freedom, their equality has been endowed by what is called the Creator. And it doesn't matter to me whether you think that Creator is God or the Big Bang or a life source that the scientists are still wrestling with. It doesn't matter to me how you label that. In the world of cosmology and astrophysics, the issue of the origin of creation of life is an ongoing scientific inquiry. And they have learned more about it in the last 50, 70 years than the human race has ever known. And they're still exploring. And we now got all the spaceships out exploring the universe. The Big Bang, the black hole, whether there are other planets which they've discovered in other galaxies. 200 million galaxies. They have put images of 200 million galaxies on the internet. It's an area in which I'm very interested and continue to read about since my student days. But anyway, the point I'm making is the declaration, the preamble to the Declaration of Independence ought to be in each of your offices, prominently displayed. Because we have folk who are diseased in their humanity, therefore they pretend they don't need to be vaccinated. So the scientific world is pretty united that if we're going to smother this across the earth, the vaccine and wearing masks are 2 of the items, until we know better, that will help us smother the pandemic. And so those diseased human beings today, you see, and I use that term deliberately, disease, somehow they have lost their way. They deny their humanity. They deny that they have been created by the Creator, like all the rest of us. So in any case, I lay that framework So where do we go from here, community or chaos? And I will try to do this as briefly as possible. Martin Luther King Jr., my colleague and mentor, and my Moses, in fact, is saying that our movement out of the 60s, 50s, and 60s was a movement raising the question far beyond the issue of segregation and racism. Will the nation become a community of human beings who can put into practical form in every crossroads, every intersection, every community, the blessings of being birthed as living souls? Or will the nation continue the course of leaving male chauvinism and domination, sexism, and racism, and violence, and plantation capitalism as the historical forces that invisibly, like and worse than COVID-19, influence we the people of the United States of America? So I lay this before you in your teaching and your work as major task, as the foundation for human rights in the United States of America. And having said then, I want to add that the movement of 1953, 1973 is why we have Trump. The congealing of all the forces of spiritual wickedness to say, no, we're going to keep the old nation. We're going to keep things as they are. We're not going to greet every newborn baby with an environment that is friendly to life for that baby. So in the light of that, the issue today is the clash between the forces of spiritual wickedness and a movement that is called for the nation becoming the nation inherently embedded in the preamble of the Constitution and the preamble of the Declaration of Independence. So we're like all of us, you are all like the African poet back in the 1960s, who was quoted as saying, I am a citizen of a country that does not yet exist. I am a citizen of a country that does not yet exist. And my own addition to that sentence is that by the grace of God, I will live in that country and work in my country to make that country come into being. So I think this means you have one of the most creative opportunities that anyone has in the country, any agency. And I want to say three things about it. One, make the Declaration of Independence a major teaching, educating, learning, examining, analyzing instrument for your work. It's not enough to be anti-racist, anti-Semitism, anti-brutality to immigrant people, or it's not enough to talk about that. We have to help our nation lay the framework for how we become a more human nation in every aspect of our life. So I urge all of you, make the Declaration of Independence preamble a pillar of your teaching and educating, not just anti-racism or anti-bigotry, but lay the foundation for the transforming of our country. And then the second thing I would like to urge you to think about is the necessity of helping people through your agency to learn the language of humanity that says we are all living souls of the human race and we should have dignity. We don't have in the United States the language of politics that we need, or the language of economics, or the language of anti-racism that we need. There has been no emphasis in our nation for people to learn the language of democracy. So let your agencies, secondly, work with people in your communities with the language of ending racism, the language of creating a more democratic society in the crossroads of Los Angeles, the language of truth and justice. I heard, and I don't remember where I heard this, but I heard it over a television commentation program. I didn't take note that enemies in the United States cannot be converted. Well, that's felonious. If we learn the language of equality and the nonviolent language of justice, it will heap coals of fire upon the enemy's heads and cause them to be confronted with the truth that they have not yet been confronted with. And then the third and final thing I want to push with you is that you decide that what I'm talking about is what we in the movement in the 60s meant when we talked about nonviolent struggle. I will talk for just a minute of how I've come to a nonviolent perspective. First of all, at age 8, on the streets of Massillon, Ohio, I was running an errand on Main Street. I can go back to Massillon and show you the spot where it happened on Main Street. I was running an errand after school for my mother. And as I turned the corner on the Main Street, in a beautiful spring day, there was a car on my side of the street, parked, windows wide open. And in the car was a youngster, perhaps close to my own age, I don't remember. And as that youngster saw me coming around the corner, he stuck his head out of the window, stood on the seat, shoulders, and yelled at me the N-word and some other racist remark, which I knew he had learned from his parents. And I went over to the car and slapped his face and ran on and did my errand. I ran back home. The car was gone when I passed the same spot, but I ran on home. And for the first time, I sat in a favorite chair in the kitchen as my mother was working on, I suppose, our evening meal. And for the first time, I told her that I had slapped this youngster, this person of my generation, probably. Now, I started that at age 4. I'm now about 8 years old. Because I remember a white playmate living in the same block that I lived on Tremont Street in Massillon, suddenly calling me a racist expletive, and I just hit him as hard as I could hit him. Age 4. Now at age 8, I've told my mother the first time that this is what I usually did on the playing field or on the street. Or in the parks, rather. I don't remember this ever happening on the school playing field, but in the parks. In any case, my mother did not turn away from the task that she was doing at the stove with her back to me, but she said quietly to me, "Jimmy, what good did that do?" And then she engaged in a long soliloquy about who we were, about our church, St. James AME Zion Church, but my father was a pastor, and about who we were as a people, about our commitment to Jesus, our people, that the way in which we loved each other, and how that had the power to do good. What good did the last sentence that I remember is, "And Jimmy, there must be a better way." It was the last sentence in her conversation with me. But I heard a voice in me saying, "I will never again fight on a playing field, in the park, or over being called a racist epithet." And then I also heard myself saying towards the end of her statement that I will find a better way. Nonviolence has a simple beginning, and it is this: the gift of life is a gift of love. It is a gift of love from the Creator. It is a gift of faith. Now, not religious junk, but of faith. It's required. You cannot be a human being without a confidence in your gift of life, or confidence that you can attain measures of life. It is a gift of creation, of the Creator. Nonviolence, as Gandhi proposed it, is simply this. Gandhi said that the forces that created us is the greatest force in the universe. And if we use those powers instead of hatred, instead of violence, instead of injustice and cruelty and torture, he said, the greatest power of the universe is the power of life. If we human beings learn to use those powers, we would be astonished of how we would reshape the earth to reflect life itself. So I commend to you. Where do we go from here? Chaos or community? I've suggested to you simply the tensions and fears and animosities current in public life today represent the chaos. Let the International Association of Official Human Rights Agencies become the force that helps the nation make true. We hold these truths are self-evident. that all are created equal and that all are endowed. Let your agency help lead our nation, this we the people of the U.S., to become far more just and far more human. I'm pleased to have been with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Reverend Lawson, for your words, for your years of leadership, for what you have done to bring us to the place we are, and for helping guide us with infinite hope to craft a new human rights agenda for our nation and really the world, which we're a big part of. You are a real treasure that I'm so proud to say that is in Los Angeles. And we are so fortunate to have you. And I just want to thank you on behalf of the entire board of directors and members of the International Association of Official Human Rights Agencies for you sharing this time with us.
You're welcome. I wish your conference great success.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.